welcome back to another episode of the DIY Sugar Baby Podcast. We are starting up again. Of course, this is a baby podcast, so things like scheduling and uploading is all in a little bit of an experimental tester stage. But thank you all to those who've been consistently supporting my platform. Hands down, I definitely notice those of you who just go that extra mile to either send me positive affirmation, that sort of thing. It is so very much appreciated. There are so many exciting things that have been happening for the House of Quartz platform that has included being approved for video podcast uploads. So over time, you're going to see us continue to level up, and we love that you all are being a part of that. We're also seeing some growth on the Twitch stream as well. We're looking at doing a giveaway for our first 1,500 followers, and I'm just super excited about that. And of course, you can come hang out with me over there when I'm not online or on Discord over at twitch.tv/RosieQuartz. For today's episode, I am so excited about this one. Let me tell you, we are interviewing two of my favorite Witch Talk mutuals. We're going to be talking about religious trauma, oppressive structures and how they impact our voice, things like trauma, as well as learning to set healthy boundaries and tools that you can use to establish those boundaries and hold them with people that maybe are in your life that, well, you can't just cut out, and they are there, and you just are looking for something that will potentially help you use your voice to stand up for yourself and validate those conscious adult decisions you've been making for your own well-being. Our guests are that Chris Wilson and Fierce Puffer Fish. Both of them make absolutely fantastic content. Chris is an interfaith minister, so very much still aware of like both the pagan witchy sides as well as speaking to those who are on the Christian side of spirituality as well. And of course we have Fierce Pufferfish is actually, a lot of you who have found my content on TikTok actually found me because I was using an audio created by Fierce Pufferfish. Their area of expertise is actually in the vocal area, and they have so much to say, so much amazing information to say on the subject of how trauma impacts your voice. Something to look forward to and be excited about for their content. Absolutely, please go support Chris Wilson. Please support Fierce Pufferfish. There's so much there. Of course, Chris has projects and structures that are being built in terms of their platform and to look forward to. If you haven't already seen it, Fierce Pufferfish and their partner are building a transportable home that is going to take them out of Texas into, well, another part of the country. But without further ado, let's hop into the actual subject matter with our interview with Chris Wilson and Fierce Pufferfish. Hello everybody, I am your host, Rosie Quartz, and welcome to the DIY Sugar Baby Podcast, which is all about establishing consent and autonomy for yourself. We are here with our episode we're calling The Salt Circle. We're going to be talking about religious trauma, oppressive structures. The Salt Circle, in reference to myself and my guests here, are all kind of a little bit more on the witchy pagan side of things. However, I'm going to allow them to introduce themselves. I'm actually going to start over here with that Chris Wilson. Hi, Chris.
Hi, how you doing?
Good, thank you. And welcome. Thank you for being here on this episode. I'm going to just kind of invite you to share what your area of expertise is, what your interests are in religious trauma and all of that good stuff.
Sure. So my background is in the social sciences. I have a degree in sociology and a master's in religion. And I've worked as an interfaith minister for the past about 20 years now, actually. And so my specialty has been studying religious trauma. I just did a master's thesis on cult indoctrination tactics in mainstream Christianity. And yeah. I've worked in crisis response, so I have extensive training in terms of trauma and trauma response and disaster management.
Fantastic. All really great things there. And 20 years, like 2 decades in that field as well. That is absolutely phenomenal. Both here are TikTok mutuals of mine, and we just like go through each other's content over this stuff. It's like that the content that makes your brain, but you also learn a lot of good things from. And Fierce Pufferfish here. Why don't you introduce yourself and talk about a little bit about how we started vibing and the conversations we've been having.
Hello, lovely humans. I am Fierce Pufferfish. IRL, I am a voice teacher. My focus is actually on unpacking performance trauma. My degree is in music performance with a minor in psychology. I don't even know where to go from there. I'm super excited. We started talking about our various experiences in unpacking trauma and how it's affected the way that we engage with the world and engage with each other month ago, 2 months ago, and things have kind of just gone downhill from there. So
it's just been a ride.
And I mean, I'm kind of excited to ride this wave and see where it goes today.
I am as well. Like I said, the whole point of like the salt circle is to kind of like spill, like share some mutual interests and spill a little bit of the tea on the structures they've been in. Before we really dive into that, of course, trigger warning for those who may have religious trauma, of course. If we go into some heavier subject matter, your mental health comes first. And if you feel your brain doing the whoop, by all means, take care of your mental health first and come back later, or you don't have to engage whatsoever. The whole point of this is validity, education, collaboration, boosting each other's content, that sort of thing. And thank you to everybody who is listening in and supporting this content. You are fantastic. Our whole thing here, kind of like an overarching theme, is oppressive structures. So we're going to kind of share our experience, like how we each have kind of a unique oppressive structure that specifically has influenced our lives or the people that we work with on a daily basis. For myself, it was the Seventh-day Adventist Church. I am a pastor's daughter, got the pastor's kid trauma, all that good stuff. And of course, that had a deep impact on my identity development, which is going to tie into like we talked about before this started about names and things like that in our identity. So for myself, it was the Seventh-day Adventist Church very specifically, which has led to deconstruction into witchydom. Chris, what was your big bad?
Well, I grew up Southern Baptist as well as conservative Episcopalian, so kind of a dichotomous upbringing there. Left the church after a lot of trauma with that, and then have dealt with a lot of other systems of oppression, just as somebody who is disabled and neurodivergent and has been in and out of church structures and still is to this day as somebody who's ordained.
Yes, that's right, because you're interfaith clergy, if I remember correctly.
That's correct.
Yeah. And the ironic thing is the Seventh-day Adventist Church is like a derivative of that's the first one there. My brain wanted Baptist. My brain wanted to say baptism. I'm like, that's not correct. The Baptist Church. Yeah, it's like a combination of the Baptist and Methodist Church. And of course, Fish, yours in particular just had my brain like, what?
What?
This is fascinating.
So this is one of my like weird party facts that like is also a fundamental trauma. So I grew up with one foot in the 1400s. My family does medieval reenactment, and there's this very large, well-known group that does medieval reenactment. And for the most part, it can be pretty good. Unfortunately, the branch in the area that it's in right now has turned into a bit of a culture. And so there's definitely been this strange effect of like, I grew up with my weekends being living in feudal Europe. And then the rest of my weekdays is like modern day United States. And so it's created a very strange dichotomy in myself and in how I engage with the world. And then since then, like I still am involved a lot of times in that culture, not directly at events anymore. But since then, you know, I've also experienced being a person with accessibility needs, being a person with educational aid needs in the United States. And yeah, so that's been fun.
Yep. I hear that for sure. And I'm picking up honestly, there's kind of like a theme of dichotomy for a lot of us here of like one hand this structure, but then like there's also this other reality on the other, and kind of just like having to almost like have a foot in multiple worlds, so to speak. Yeah, and I find that fascinating. Like right off the bat, kind of a similar theme there. And I just, when I first heard about like this feudal system here, I was like, I know of LARPing communities, but to actually have an established power structure inherent in all of this. And if I remember correctly from a conversation we had, you were actually like, there was whole talks about you at like literally being prepared to marry being royal.
Oh my God.
You're being prepared to marry another.
This is one of those things I used to describe as like a ha-ha thing until I was describing it to some friends and it got real quiet. You know,
I hate when that happens.
Yeah, right.
You're just like, oh.
So I grew up, okay, so another thing to know is that in this group we have different kingdoms. Like there's literally a different map that divides up the world entirely differently. And we have different kings and da-da-da-da-da. There's like ways that you can rise to the top of the political structures. There's awards that you can get that give you clout. And basically the whole thing, you can play politics very well. So I grew up with very influential parents in this group and grew up like essentially, let me back this up for a piece of context, because I think this will do a much better TLDR. I have watched people kneel and swear fealty to my father with a straight face. Just no questioning, doing whatever he asks. So I grew up with this feeling of responsibility of inheriting a powerful family structure. And was kind of taught this thing of like, I need to find for me a partner who can equal that, who can match that level. And so I would be looking for other people in this group who grew up with also influential and powerful families. And there was this guy that I dated for a while. And our whole thing is that his family was very influential in a different kingdom, and my family was very influential in mine. And we were going to get together and do this entire like cross kingdom power structure and just conquer everything. And real cute that.
Real cute. And that was wild to me. When I first heard you talking about this, I was like, I remember, because I was very much an escapist child, like stacks of books kind of thing, like back when reading was a personality trait. And then like you read books about those time periods where like you put yourself in those shoes of being the princess being married off against your will to the neighboring kingdom, being like, what would I do in that situation? And then to meet somebody who literally today in my own timeline is dealing with these power structures of you're going to marry into this other powerful family, I was just like, that is deeply, deeply unsettling, because like, that's supposed to be an escapist fantasy thing that like you come up with all this stuff that you're like, oh, this is what I would do in that situation, da-da-da-da-da-da. And I find that just so fascinating that it was still around.
Yeah, I think it gets into also like, you know, the stories that we tell ourselves, right? Because so much of, as well, the things that happen in this group, I'm trying not to name it because there's a lot of folks in it, and frankly, I don't want to deal with that. So like, one of the big problems I think we have in this group is like raising children in it needs to be done with a lot more intentionality than happens right now, because like adults have the ability to sit there and be like, okay, it's the weekend. Now I'm going to play pretend that it's the 1400s. But a 5-year-old doesn't have the understanding of that nuance. So when you raise a child with, it's the 1400s now, and these are the rules for society, the only part the 5-year-old hears is, these are the rules for society. And it doesn't go well.
Oh, for real? Like, yeah, Chris.
I'm paralleling that.
Like, yeah,
like already paralleling that to like the ultra conservative churches. Like, it's suddenly the 1400s, and it just like the amount of parallels of "we are not of this world." That phrase that you get in the churches, that it's supposed to be this timeless thing, and yet, how many people are LARPing church? I mean,
Oh,
how,
okay, for real.
That's a good way to put that.
just like how many people are they live in the modern world, they sin however they're going to sin, they do whatever they're going to do behind the scenes, but as long as they've larped the image of the correct church person, then they're fine. And then you raise children in this and you end up with the same problem.
Yes,
You
and
have-
the kids don't know. The kids don't know that it's a LARP. They don't know that it is a mask and a presentation, for sure. Like I literally call it spiritual LARPing on my content. Yeah, for real. Like I was raised to believe. Like I'm in the place now where I was like, wow, that was probably child abuse. Like, but like you get raised to believe the Sunday keepers are going to come and unalive you all, and you're gonna have to flee to the mountains and possibly watch your family be brutally like disassembled in front of you by the Sunday keepers. Like children don't know how to process that. Children don't know how to, like, if you as an adult want to go there and you have the tools to like mentally be in that headspace 24/7, the kids don't. So yeah, it's very much like this. Adults have an awareness of all the complexities, but children being raised in it with that intent don't. They really don't, for sure.
Well, I'd argue that even adults don't necessarily have that capability. I mean, this is the problem of indoctrination to such an extreme mentality, is that if you have to suspend reality to get to a certain belief system, and you are teaching people that they have to suspend reality, it inherently primes people to be able to be abused with anything that is non-logical.
Actually, that is excellent. That is absolutely excellent. Did you have something there, Fish?
I think, and we're also getting to one of the commonalities that you see in a lot of these oppressive structures is this idea of our world and the rest of the world. And it's so important to set that separation early on, to say the things like, they are going to attack you if you go out there without us. We are the world that cares about you. We're the world that pays attention to you, and we're here for you. And it gives that immediate divide. And I think so many of the actions that these structures take are dedicated to widening the gap between our world and that world, so it's harder to get there.
The whole bubble, right? Yes. My church always phrased it as, we are in the world but not of it. I was either homeschooled or put through the Adventist school system right up through university, and all of the schools are strategically placed very intentionally away from the world. They're as far, like the students are isolated as much as possible, and it really does become this bubble that you are stuck in. And actually, Chris, you kind of brought, like, because we wanted to talk about how these structures, being in these structures, can impact you psychologically if you are neurodivergent. I myself have, over the past year, been kind of coming to some realizations about myself. Neurodivergence runs very deep in my family. And I was like, I'm not sure how I didn't clue in that there was something here with myself, most likely, in all disclosure. Going to go and work on that actual physical diagnosis. Fish, I know you've talked about like ADHD, being ADHD, that kind of stuff. And Chris, of course, if you follow Chris's content, so much excellent neurodivergent content. So I was kind of wondering what y'all thoughts were on just like how it influenced you being part of these structures, how maybe it impacted your identity or your experience with it.
You want to go first?
Sure. I think one of the things that I've looked at in terms of religion and neurodivergence is the fact that we end up in situations where, especially within the autism community, you have a tendency to either completely accept everything that you've been given because it's a rigid structure, and that rigid structure of religion allows you to feel comfortable. Right. I've talked about this in terms of the number of undiagnosed autistics we have in the military. As a veteran myself, the number of autistic folks, or people who were likely autistic, I can't diagnose them myself, but who were likely to be autistic or some other flavor of neurodivergent was huge in both the intel fields and the maintenance fields.
I had never put that together before.
This is the structure and rigidity of both the military and high control religion is something that is very often comforting, and it gives a black and white experience for the autistic mind. It is a very safe feeling. And so it can give you clear answers where you belong in society, what you're supposed to do, what you're not supposed to do, who you're supposed to dislike, who you're supposed to like. But the problem is if it breaks at any time where it stops working, there's no way to fix it. It cracks open, the egg is broken, it cannot be put back together, and you end up shattering an entire worldview because you can't put the pieces back on, and you try for so long, and you try just to put these pieces back on, and it doesn't fit anymore because something has pushed you past the point where you can make these assumptions. And especially for neurodivergent people, as they get older and gain more context, we very often see this happening because one of the things that people seem less neurodivergent as they get older is very often they've gained enough context that they can see more nuance. And so we end up in these situations where we have a lot of deconstructed, or at least, out of their original context, neurodivergence, because they can no longer hold on to the rigidity.
Yeah, for sure. And I feel like from what I've seen of your content, a lot of it seems to be you in the space. Like it's almost like a liminal space where like it cracks once. And I very much resonate with that whole, like, once it's cracked, you can't, like, it's just, you cannot make it work in your head anymore, and there's no going back to it. And it really feels like this liminal space of just like this, you've lost your structure. And I've seen, like, with your content, I find a lot of people who've had that experience are there in that space, and you're just like, yeah, this is what happened. This is what happened to you in your brain with your experience. And I think that's very important what you are specifically providing there for that community. That's so appreciated.
Thank you. I think it is important because I think even before I got on TikTok, and I've, as I said, I've been in this field working in different elements of ministry for 20 some odd years. And even then, even with my research, even with the things I've done, I had no idea how many more people just were experiencing these things. Like the scope of being on TikTok and having like hundreds upon hundreds of people go, oh my God, how are you reading my life right now? How are you speaking about these things and understanding for the first time somebody sees me? And it knocks me over. Like I get teared up about these kinds of things because I'm going, how many more of us are there who are experiencing this at the same time? And I see both of your content, and I go, somebody else is doing it. Right? So I'm like it brings me so much joy because each one of us has our own facet of where we put our special interests, or we talk about these things. And all I can do is just like be like the ultimate fan person, like just going, yay, because I see other people who, are able to word things that I can't word. And they tell me, oh, you're telling me things that I couldn't find words for. And I'm going, this is community. This is community.
For sure. Fish, did you have any thoughts to add to this?
The growing up in the 1400s as a person with ADHD is very interesting. So there's this very strange combination that you get in this group. First of all, there's this narrative that like most of the people who come to play in the 1400s, right, are neurodiverse in some variety or another. One of the things that's said, like quietly implied, less said with the full chest, is like, oh, well, we're the people who don't fit in, and there's that idea of like, yeah, everybody here is a little bit neurodiverse. But then at the same side of it, if you say something along the lines of like, well, I mean, I'm really ADHD, I'm struggling with that, they'll be like, the ADHD doesn't exist in the 1400s, so you have to pretend that you don't know you have it. It's like,
oh,
that's a little strange.
Dear. Yeah.
And it's this idea of like, Right. And the bit that I think gets kind of insidious, right, is that they're telling you that you have to pretend you don't know you have it. Everybody is full on, flat out saying, act like it, act like it's a
Right.
not known thing. But then at the same time, like the message underneath there is really just deny yourself. And it's like simultaneously
Yeah.
saying it flat out and trying to hide it. It's amazing. Yeah.
Okay, right, and that is so weird to me. Like the lack of recognition for like other people's brain. Like they still would have been doing the ADHD things that the ADHD people back then would be doing the ADHD things. Like
Right.
the neurodivergent people would be doing neurodivergent things. Like the behavior is still there. Oh boy.
I feel like
Yeah.
a lot of it comes to like, you know, when you get to these oppressive systems, a lot of the people who rise to power in oppressive systems are the people who, not necessarily the kind of folks you maybe want to be in control of your life. And a lot of those folks really struggle with empathy, and they have the emotional processing powers of like a donut. So like you get to the point where you ask for help, and like they hear help, and their brain just goes. So like, and so like they will come up with whatever reason they can find, right, to make it not something that they have to deal with, because the moment these people who have come into power have to face the fact that they now have more ability to affect the world, right? They can feel that pressure of the ability to affect the world. And I think when you hear the words help and also feel that pressure, it's very easy to break down and just kind of fall to a default of denying people, of being like, this is why it's your problem and not mine.
Yes. I've talked a little bit about how some of this theology and the oppressive structures relate to learned helplessness. Because, like, for example, heaven, right? Nothing bad happens in heaven. So you don't have to go to therapy. You don't have to call out abusive people or hold them accountable or yourself accountable, because Jesus is coming again. Jesus will make everything better. So you just hold on for Jesus and just go on with your life as is, and that's your coping mechanism or your strategy. And yeah, I definitely hear that. Like the whole mental health and help. I remember asking my father, like I was trying to tell him, like, I'm depressed. This was somewhere about 15, and he asked me, "Oh, are you engaging in indigenous spirituality?" As a pastor. Yeah. It was very much a correlation of like inherently demonizing indigenous cultures, POC cultures, like the way that like let's say hoodoo or voodoo is viewed by the Seventh-day Adventist Church is inherently racist. It's just a smidge racist, and I think it just a little bit, and I think it becomes really concerning when you have like these power structures that are kind of predatory, bringing people in who resonate with a rigid structure, but then adding these elements into that rigid structure that are harmful to other people groups as well. And so these people who are resonating with the rigid structure they might not necessarily want to perpetuate that. Like I remember distinctly one guy who was definitely neurodivergent, and he had been raised to perceive that rape culture was not a thing. And it was hardcore on this campus telling the girls on campus it's not a thing, it's not real, because of this very rigid structure that he'd been raised in and his brain was operating in. And we were like, we can tell you, like, I don't think you intend to put this out there, this really harmful thing out there, but you don't actually recognize that it's harmful. And that's tough.
I think that happens a lot, though. I mean, I'm in and out of progressive Christian spaces all the time. Mm-hmm. I preach on a somewhat regular basis at a UCC church, and the United Church of Christ is known for being pretty liberal, and it's known for being pretty progressive. And yet, in going into these spaces, the amount of privilege and ignorance is still immense. This is one of the struggles as I've talked to other clergy who are very progressive, who are trying to do this work, who are trying to be open-minded, who are trying to help people move out of these very rigid spaces and understand a theology that is open and welcoming and pluralistic and not hateful. And the struggle is, how do you meet people where they are and also create a safe space because of the paradox of tolerance. Like, how do you even do that? How do you meet the hateful person and get them to hear you? How do you get them out of a fear state when they've been indoctrinated so heavily to think they're going to be chased down and persecuted in this kind of way?
Oh, absolutely. Because we're seeing this relating to like some very harmful things on a larger scale. Like I literally accidentally walked into an anti-vaccine protest out here with people being like the government this and that. And one of the weirdest ones I came across through Twitter was the vaccine will scramble your DNA, and then after you die, God will not be able to tell it's your DNA and put you back together at the end of time.
I saw that. I saw that.
Like, okay.
Wow.
What?
Yeah. Wow. That's amazing. Yeah, no, I've also had this like accidentally running into the anti-vax crowd. Apparently there's a lot of anti-vaxxers who are turning buses into houses now. And you get this very strange mix where like you'll have these, I have a reason for this. Follow me for a second. Okay. So you'll have these people, like everybody comes in resonating around the same message, right? Like we're all just trying to survive. We're all doing these things where we want to see the world. We have this passion. We believe in like the sovereignty of the individual, things like that. And then you have people come in and they hear these messages, right? Like seeing the world, the sovereignty of the individual. And they go, I can use that. And they come into like the sovereignty of the individual. Exactly. That's why you can't get the vaccine. It's putting it onto I didn't consent to that. Right. And you get that thing going there. You have like, so oftentimes, like one of the seeds of oppressive systems is people who walk into a situation and they see healthy interactions. They see interactions that help people grow. And I don't think it's entirely on purpose at all, but they go, oh my God, I can use this to get people to grow the way that I have been taught is the right way to grow. So I'm going to do that. And then they come in and they say, here, I'm here to help you. Here's our values that we share. And since you share those values with me, you should act like me. And it goes from there. Yeah.
Yes. Now this is, I interact with a couple of people who are thinking they might have a diagnosis of narcissistic personality disorder, or they have a diagnosis of narcissistic, like they literally do. And they kind of just have these breakdowns of, I'm being told I'm a bad person. I'm inherently a monster. I don't care. And there's no distinction between like a narcissist versus a sociopath. Like a sociopath, legit, like that's the whole like lack of empathy. But a narcissist with the personality disorder is inherently forged in trauma. It's what we're seeing with a lot of research. And it comes down to, it's essentially an adaptation of you grew up in an unsafe environment and you had to use manipulation to get what you needed from people around you. And that's something like at least I myself have noticed within these oppressive structures, is that the people at the top like are not necessarily monsters all the time, these pastors, things like that. But you definitely see the manipulative behavior, you see the ego defenses, especially in regards to providing care. And I find that there's a lot of ego wrapped up into how well they provide care, even though they're manipulating people, even though they may be downright abusive. Heaven forbid you pointed out, and heaven forbid that you imply that they're not a good caregiver in some capacity, right?
The vulnerability is huge. I was actually having a conversation about this morning with someone else who I met when I was interning at a specific church, and we were talking about our experiences there. And one of the things that we were talking about is how often the fragility of ego is part of the people who lead in these spaces. And not only just ego, but often that these are male-dominated spaces. So that we not only have ego in general, we have men who have very fragile masculinity in on top of that, especially with the ideas of being back in the day, not of this world, but having to uphold these rigid structures of like patriarchy at the same time.
Yes.
And so they see themselves very often, from what I've seen, as victims. They do see themselves in that way. They see themselves as being kind of victimized by circumstance, by the leadership, by the church.
The long suffering.
But to be fair, churches are, with family systems theory, very, very capable of being abusive. And so we are at times seeing very legitimate situations where they are being harmed and abused, which only perpetuates the narcissistic defenses, in the sense that they then become even more rigid on no, that my way, cult of personality, and it creates a feedback loop. And that's how we move from maybe a moderate church, moderately conservative, purple church as they call it sometimes, into radicalization. Because as you begin to move into these mindsets of fear and control, you take your folks with you.
Yes.
You know?
Yes, because if I remember correctly from my classes, family systems theory was the like, I don't remember if it was specifically psychology or sociology, but it was the theory that everything is interconnected. Like all, like from the small family unit is connected to like a church unit, connected to a school unit, connected to like the provincial government, to like the full Canadian government, just straight. Well, of course I'm Canadian, crossing the borders here, but it's basically just this theory that everything here, something over here is going to influence over here. Like it's all tied together.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
The basic thing with family systems is triangulation, that there's always, even with two people, there's a third party. It's a topic you're talking about or another person you're talking about. And so whenever there's strain, it's like an interconnected web. If you pull on an edge of a web of like a netting, it changes the dynamic and tension in it. And the same way this happens socially in kind of a web of connectivity. So if you have somebody who, for example, is the pastor and they are receiving all of the strain of the community on them, and you get this in the people, everybody who identifies as empaths, everybody who identifies as caregivers, the same thing, we take on the strain of the system as a means of trying to hold the system straight.
Right.
But if we don't have the right boundaries, we can become a sink for those strains, rather than being able to have people hold accountability for themselves. We become the dumping grounds of strain in the system, and we break instead of being able to hold the right boundaries so that the system holds its own tension.
Yes, that's something I remember, like, as I started deconstructing, and I was looking at like these pastors being like long suffering, these missionaries who like died decades too young, all this stuff. I was like, why aren't you all like, that thing that you took on is supposed to go to a social worker. Why are you helping this person with addictions? That should be between them and their doctor. Like, why are you taking these things onto yourself that you're not qualified for that technically? And yet you as the pastor are taking on literally all of the woes, the personal woes of these people, but you don't actually have the qualifications to take this on. Or the training not to take it on personally into yourself like a therapist would, for sure. And actually, this kind of like delves into something else I wanted to cover in this podcast with fish, because some of our conversations is like, as you mentioned, you've talked about vocal, like how your voice can be impacted by trauma. And some of the things that you've talked to me about have blown my mind. And for example, for our audience, we were having a conversation about vocal tones. And I was talking about how like I just have, it's like, as a lot of you know, kink content, I do caregiver dom stuff. And I've had a lot of my clients when I was doing like caregiving, senior care, disability care, tell me, you have a very calm, measured, even tone. I'm like, yeah, I've had that for a long time. I have specific memories of like my parents telling me my voice is too high pitched, too whiny, and sometimes to be very intense about it. And then Fish, you brought up like, yeah, abusers don't like whiny tones because whining is a sign of distress, like the high pitched tone up there. And literally describing like how it happens, and like, yeah, abusers subliminally don't like hearing tones of distress and will intentionally reinforce very even tones of speaking so that they don't have to hear that you're in distress. And so something else you brought up is how like abusers often wear a mask of care. And I was wondering if you wanted to talk just a little bit more about how trauma can impact your voice and how these structures can impact your voice.
Yeah. So this is one of those ones I could talk for days about this. Let's get the TLDR version. So when people get stressed out, right, their voices go up. This is actually a near universal experience. So far, every culture that we've found, this is a universal experience. We haven't found anybody yet who doesn't do this. So across the board, it seems to be a basic human thing. And that's probably because the way that our actual phonation system works, the addition of tension has a tendency to take our voice and put it up here. So as I'm adding tension in here, you can hear it come out in my voice. We've got a little bit more of an edge to it now. And you can hear it's just kind of like I'm ready to do something, right?
Yeah.
And you feel that. You start preparing for it because we, as a species that's designed for community, we are designed to hear these signs of more energy, ready to go, feeling like you need help. We're designed to hear all of these things and respond to them. So because that's a fundamental thing, and because it's a thing that we start doing very early on, you'll also find that the policing of a person's voice starts very early on in oppressive communities. I'm going to talk a little bit about sexism and dynamics because it's very, very obvious in our cultures here. Women's voices are considered to be whiny and frustrating. Anything that's considered feminine is up here, and you can't have a feminine voice that's down here because this is too calm and collected and put together, even though there's many women who speak like this all across the board. As a matter of fact, this is a very relaxed voice. But the fact of the matter is we're taught, right, to have a specific voice that fits the specific role of woman. We're taught to have a specific voice that fits the role of man. And now I'm going to be masculine and assertive, and I'm in control of my situation. I've got false vocal folds coming in to give me a growl. That's also, by the way, a relaxation thing, your false vocal folds. No, that's the point. So coming back to it, like we get this use of the voice very specifically when you break away from how an oppressive system wants you to use your voice, there's very heavy punishment, right?
Right.
Like one of the things that everybody has heard at some point or another, well, she sounds like a man. Ooh. Right, exactly. Yeah. And it's said in a mean way. Or, you know, oh my God, you talk so high, you sound like a girl. Justin Bieber, for example, when everybody was hating on Justin Bieber, and listen, but people would do that, right, by making fun of his voice and saying that he sounded like a woman. And it's getting into that, like, you are not allowed to present yourself in a fashion that breaks against our society. And when you have done anything that breaks against our rules, we're going to punish every aspect of you that we can find that breaks our rules. So not just like Justin Bieber being a jerk to people and people being angry, but also Justin Bieber having a feminine voice. We're going to be angry about that too. And
yeah, this kind of reminds me of the scene from like the very first How to Train Your Dragons movie, where the community is just like looking at Hiccup. It's like, you just have to change
all of this,
it's like you just gestured to all of me.
Yeah. So there's this thing that happens a lot. People who experience quite a lot of anxiety, like if you've had a particularly stressful time at work, for example, to take something maybe a little bit less charged, if you've had a really stressful time at work for a while, right, that'll actually come out in your throat. Your voice will be more tired a lot faster. You can lose your voice. A lot of people talk about this all the time, right? Where they're like, I'm losing my voice. I don't know what's going on. Maybe I've been yelling. A lot of times when we're stressed out, we carry our tension back here. We carry it in our jaw and our neck. And it means carrying the vocal folds very tightly, which means every single time you phonate, every single time you make a sound, you're putting more strain on them than you normally would. And so you'll find over long periods of exposure to a high amount of stress, you literally lose your voice. Like it's not even figuratively. You actually stop being able to speak very well. Yeah.
You're giving me a lot of realizations right now.
Yeah, I'm sitting here like,
I would love to hear it.
Oh shit, yeah.
Well, okay, so I live by my voice. I preach, I teach, I'm constantly talking, and I started having a problem, I guess it was last year, in about 2020. Now, I did get COVID, so that there was breathing issues along with that came along these times. But I was dealing with very particularly oppressive issues within the institutions I was part of. And I don't want to call anybody in specifics out, but I was part of some very, toxic situations in churches. And I I was at a point of very much reaching the end of my breaking point, because I was finishing, you know, I was in my second year of seminary and moving into my final year of seminary, and I was just in the middle of all of this, and I was literally losing my voice repeatedly. Just I was not able, like, I love singing. If you my content is mostly me talking about stuff and teaching, but if you intermittently, you'll see that I sing, and I'll record myself singing. It's been a passion my whole life. My mom's a music teacher, and I couldn't sing. Like, I was having trouble even, like, being able to keep my voice to preach, keep my voice to be able to teach, because the strain, because of the oppressive systems I was dealing with. I felt like it was literally strangling me. And it took me a while, because my autism and self-awareness occasionally, when I'm high stress, just goes completely off the board, and I can't tell what is going on to save my life. But but once I finally realized, I was like, it feels, you know, not to be too graphic, hopefully, but like that I had a hand around my throat. Like I was being strangled in my own way, that my voice was being held down. And it took a huge realization of me stepping away and going, something's wrong. I've got to stop. Like, I don't know what's wrong yet, but I have to figure out what this is. And I have to figure out where I feel like I'm being silenced, because it physically was affecting me that much.
Absolutely.
Oh, yeah. I am very much resonating. And what came to mind for me as you're sharing that, Vish, is the people I was working with in senior care, specifically the elderly, and situations in which they were not receiving the care they needed, or when they were frustrated. The Alzheimer's dementia patients in particular, when they're sundowning and their brain is not registering things and they're frustrated, and you'd watch the frustration escalate, and all of a sudden, like, it's like, voice is gone. And it was almost like the caregiving system that is set up for disability care, senior care, waits for that silent moment. Is just like, we'll put up with their distress, and then at some point they'll just give out, right?
Okay.
Yeah, right. It's just a matter of just get through it, and then at some point there's the relief of their voice cutting at some point, because Alzheimer's care, dementia is hard. Yeah. Oh, mercy.
So, a thing that I keep meaning to bring up to you, because it's a thing, it gives me so much joy. Every single time you talk about your brain doing a little sound, right? The really fun thing about that is that it's a very relaxed phonation that you're doing. It's a very free and open phonation. Every single time I hear it, like, you're literally making a happy sound.
Right.
Like, that's a sound that when you're carrying tension, try this. It's really fun. Either try it at home or right now. I don't care. Those of you who are listening, you're about to hear something freaking delightful. Try staying tense and going.
Yeah.
Doesn't work.
Exactly. To get the lips to move like that, you have to relax your face. So this is honestly, like, this is one thing that I will use as a test of how I'm feeling in a situation, because with the ADHD, sometimes I have trouble checking in with myself and seeing where I'm at. I'll just see if I can do that. And if I'm having trouble doing that, I'll be like, wow, I am very tense in this moment. And that's my sign to take a step back, checking in with how my voice is interacting with me. Yeah. Pretty fun.
Yeah, I love that. That makes my brain go, because I do Twitch streaming. I do Twitch streaming several times a week. And if you follow me on Twitch, if you're watching me, as you watch, chat, and interact, you get channel points. And you can use those channel points to redeem actions, like redeem a hydrate, I'll take a drink of water, things like that, posture check. And one of the things that you can redeem, people enjoy hearing it so much, they can redeem a brain go. And so if they redeem that, people will just want to hear the fun, relaxed, like, brain goes sounds. That makes me so happy that humans are like this. That's so precious.
That is fabulous. One of the things that I try to talk about in my studio a lot is that you cannot dissociate your voice from your fundamental self. Your voice is part of you. It's the one instrument that you cannot hide your relationship with yourself with. With every other instrument, if you do the right things, it'll make the sound. But with your voice, because it's part of you and because it's controlled by a crazy electrified meat sickle up there, you've got to actually have a good relationship with it. Because, for example, Right. Have you ever been singing like in the shower or something, you're having a really good time and you hit like a high note and you're like, I didn't know I could go that high. But then you try to do it again, you're like, can I do it? And you can't hit the note anymore. It's that moment of questioning the self, right? Where your body starts preparing for a challenge the moment you question yourself there, because of course we can't dissociate ourselves from our body and our brains are part of our existence. So the moment you start questioning whether or not you can do it, you tighten up, you prepare for a challenge. And by tightening up, you can no longer reach that nice high released sound, reach and release at the same time, released.
Right.
So you can't get that beautiful sound up there again. So like, I was going somewhere with this. So one of the things that's like really, really important when you are learning how to use your voice, and I emphasize all the time, is that I don't teach people to use their instrument. I teach people to chase the joy with their instrument, to find the things that bring out that glimmer, because that's when you shine. That's when you create sounds that pull people with you. Just like that people love to hear so much, because we hear the relaxation, we hear the joy, we hear the genuine connection with self, and it becomes something beautiful. That's what we connect with.
I love that.
Love it. I absolutely love that. Like, honestly, come 2020, before that point, I had a hard time talking. It wasn't until I started being more authentic, started making the content, because my whole life, it's always been like, speak up. I can't hear you. Speak up. I was always very quiet. And I noticed that the more I was basically using TikTok to teach myself to speak, to literally like speak. Actually get it out there, and that very much resonates, because something that I've found with religious trauma and the identity that it builds, because we were talking, Bish and I mentioned before we even started recording that we're kind of like at an impasse with our birth names at the moment. Like, it's so much part of our identity from back then, and the religious structures, how they impact your voice. I found, like, for myself, as I started speaking more, I don't want to be connected with that name, because my voice and that name are not correlated with me in my head. And speaking also of religious trauma, I also wanted to cover with Chris your thesis. I haven't read all of it over myself, but what I have delved into so far, I was like, yes, yes, good stuff. I was going to ask you, what was your thesis of your paper here? Because when I first found your content, it was you talking about this paper. This is how I found you.
So yeah, my thesis is called "A Culture of Entitlement: Cult Indoctrination Tactics and Consent Violations in American Christianity." Now, that's a mouthful, but it is. I like those kind of. Fall Out Boy kind of titles for academic papers. But the baseline of this was that I actually created this paper because of TikTok. I was already interested in researching about religious trauma, and I was already serving communities that have lots of religious trauma. But the communities I was engaging with on TikTok helped me write this paper, because I wanted to write something that was accessible to people. Now, it's academic, but I tried to write it in as much mundane language as possible so that folks can read it. And that, yes, it is so dense full of information for 60 pages, but it is something I wanted to make as accessible as possible. That's one of the reasons why I have it on academia.edu completely for free, so that people can read that. Yeah. It's something for me that I wanted folks to understand, that there may not be intentional harm intended with these kinds of theologies, that people are probably just doing what they were taught to do in these contexts. And the complexity of this is that churches that are using cult indoctrination tactics very often believe they're doing it for the good of others. They believe that believing the right things and doing these specific behaviors will make someone's life that much better. And so the intentionality versus the effect is really what I wanted to highlight in this paper, about how we have to acknowledge that this is happening. that this is traumatizing. Even with the best intentions, it's traumatizing. And I think one of the biggest things that comes of that for me is recognizing that those who are still in these very high control religions are absolutely simultaneously victim and victimizer. That it is one of the complexities of trying to deconstruct, it's one of the complexities of trying to heal, is that if you have been in these places, you have been the evangelist. You have been put in a place where you have perpetuated this. You have been put in a place where you have led and taught and perpetuated these things because you were indoctrinated to it too, and you were told you had to. And so it creates a system of cyclical abuse that we've got to find a way to step out of and find a way to acknowledge this so that we can heal.
Yes, absolutely. And this actually draws a correlation for me as you were speaking with what Fish was saying as well. And I was actually wondering, Fish, about your thoughts on this, talking about like voice specifically for the people who are the leaders, because I mentally correlate them to voice. Like the pastors, the leaders, like the ones behind the pulpit, there's so much voice there that is. And I was kind of wondering your thoughts, because like I think there is a lot of focus on the victim's voice and how they're impacted, their voice is impacted. But what about for the people who are in behind the pulpit, so to speak, the leaders there?
So there's some really cool things. First of all, you can usually find in different cultures it'll manifest differently, but you can usually find a cadence of control, which is basically like when you hear people making these speeches, you'll hear these specific pauses. I just started doing it, thinking about it. Think about if you've ever heard a Barack Obama speech, right? The way that he pauses and he is putting breaks in between. Now, here's the thing. Those speeches are written beforehand. He's not thinking about every single word that's come out. He's already got them up there. It's already been thought out. But putting the pauses in there and those breaks gives you actually a little dopamine cycle in how you're experiencing the person speaking, which it's the same kind of performance. So you have this... how do I even put it? Your brain becomes like real intrigued by this strange pattern that's going on here. And you'll find when people are doing these things, they will pause before very important words. And they do that specifically because in your head, you will think of what the next word's going to be. And then they say it. And then your brain's like, aha, they said the thing. And it completes the pattern and it gives you the happy. So there's this cadence to power that you hear a lot of times. And it's very intentionally used. If you've ever seen the movie The King's Speech, they actually talk about that a little bit too, where having a specific way of speaking makes people listen.
Right.
The other side of that
movie. Yes.
The other side of that, and this I think might get more into gender as well. But this one I will say there's room for interpretation and debate. I don't want to make it like absolute. But we do tend to associate lower voices with power. When we are, one of the reasons why is because a lower voice actually takes more support from the core. Like when I put my voice down in my center of gravity here, you can hear it take a lot more resonance. It gets warmer. It also gets more solid. We have more sound coming out with not a lot more effort as I'm doing this. I'm just creating a resonance that has more force to it. And by creating more sound, more just stuff for your brain to process, it becomes more impactful with every word that I say. There's just more to chew on. Things.
So, and that's one of the interesting things in studying altered states of consciousness and ritual, like I have, that you end up with these induction, essentially, almost like a hypnotic induction, where we talk about moving into altered states of consciousness. And so when we create ritual space, we are intentionally bringing the liminal space. We are healthy ritual can be done and bringing liminal space for people to step outside the mundane into the sacred, whatever that sacred is for you. And so when we're doing this, that is both, a fish talking about the voice, the ambiance, the music, that all plays into. We also understand modern marketing with lighting and, air conditioning systems and, and these things can be done in a theatrical way, whether you're Christian or Jewish or pagan or spiritual but not religious, or just going to a concert and enjoying yourself for a random band. These are pathways that we all engage. These are pathways we all enjoy because we're human. And that's the little dopamine cycles. But yes, there is a cadence. There is a baseline of da 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 da, and it's like a vocal waltz. And you are bringing that into a space where it can be healthy, where it really draws the line for us, and especially what I was talking about in my thesis, was that when you are using primal fear to create an environment of a problem of fear, of fear of abandonment, of fear of death, of fear of these primal elements of fear, and then using this ambiance, using this cadence to draw people into an altered state, inducing that fear, and then creating a solution through love bombing. Because that's what we talk about in Cry Nights. We talk about that ambiance in both the negative, like theatrical dramatization of negativity, and then overwhelming positivity as a means of really indoctrinating that kind of psychological harm.
Okay, because the first thing that came to mind with all that was like the inducing fear cycle. What I remember, I have a distinct memory of like a sermon being like, the end of the world is coming. Jesus is coming. Give yourself to God. Otherwise, you're going to burn. Things like that. Sunday keepers are going to come. Blah blah blah. Like the whole 9 yards. Revelation, prophecy. Like building up this massive hype. Give your life. Like it's like this is coming. This massive fear wall is coming. Give your life to God, and then we pray. We submit ourselves to God, which is then followed up by nearer, my God, to thee. Like the cadence of that
altar calls and music that's loving and rocking and baby and and then that you bring out this and that's why a lot of us, even if you've left the church, can still sit there and sing hymns. Like it may be traumatizing, but can still be like, I know every word of this. I like you've seen it on TikTok, the Hillsong music.
Oh yeah, Hillsong music.
The number of people who are like, this is amazing and traumatizing and amazing and traumatizing. Like
yeah. Okay, for the audience, for anyone who might know, could you define what a cry night is?
Sure. So cry night is one I messed this up because I keep saying it too fast. Cry night. It's a typical tactic that's used very often in evangelical spaces, but also can show up in other kinds of high control groups. And typically it's inducing altered states of consciousness by starting with exhaustion. In Christian camps, very often it's a meaningful service towards the end of the week at the end of camp. You are exhausted. Very often there will be, in my experience, they go for a long hike, or you do something like, you're doing lots of physical activity that day. And then
games and things like that,
or you have a field day or something that you're doing lots of stuff, you're exhausted. You then set ambiance with it being a sunset service or just after dark service. You usually have candles, you usually have some kind of ambiance. They set the scene. And this is intended to be the literal come to Jesus moment for people in these camps. And it's supposed to be meaningful. The framing in the leadership very often is meant to be, this is where we get the converts. This is where people say the sinner's prayer. This is where people are brought closer to God. Right. The problem is that with those situations, we end up with a lot of people equating emotional breakdowns and anxiety attacks with being closer to God, which is a problem. So at a minimum, that's a problem. So these nights typically are using the strong ambiance and the exhaustion, and becomes a kind of a control tactic, even if it's not intended to be, because of that ambiance and an emotional activation that happens through the fear indoctrination and then the love bombing. Once you do the dedication, rededication, promise rings, whatever the particular service is about, and then everyone feels like they belong again, and they're getting the warm fuzzies, and then you usually get juice or playtime or some whatever,
The affirmation followed. The
affirmation.
Yeah.
And yeah, exactly. And it's exactly like a scene in many ways. It's just lacking consent. And so it becomes a very, very problematic element in the sense that you are not going in with consent. You are not going in knowing that this is what's going to happen to you, or that even this is what's happening in a psychological, emotional way.
Yeah, exactly. Like there's no prior, like consent needs to be specific. It needs to be informed. And I was put through so many cry nights as a kid, through teenage, like so many. And at no point beforehand was I ever made aware of the specific intent, the experience, and how it was how that space was put together. And yeah, just the inherent lack of consent in all of this. And as we move into, I guess, the final part of this episode, because we really wanted this to be helpful for our audience and people listening and people who have experienced these oppressive structures, people who are deconstructing, things like that. So keeping in context what we've talked about already in regards to voice and things like that, there's been a couple areas that we've noticed, at least for ourselves and things like that, things like being able to accept care, being able to ask for help, because the people who supported us were not necessarily safe people. They only provided positive affirmation if you behaved a certain way, as well as determining how to set boundaries and with who is a safe person. Are they actually safe to keep in your life, right? So as we go into like this section, I myself have been no contact with most of my family because the decision I had to make was, wow, this theology you adhere to is so unsafe for me that like I literally cannot engage with you if this is your framework and perception, right? So so first of all, Chris, I'm going to ask you, given like your area of expertise and all that, how have you found that these oppressive structures impact family groups and the ability to set boundaries, or the ability to even perceive the need for boundaries?
They strongly influence them in negative ways very often, because if your theology is based in an authoritarian baseline, your assumption is that all who are subject to the authority don't have a right to say no.
Right.
And very often that indoctrinates families into abusive systems, which is why very often the churches will ignore abuse within families as well. Because one, the pastors are very often not trained to handle those situations, and two, those situations very often are right within the realm of the perceived authority of men to do what they wish in these relationships. So there's a strong problem with that, and there's a lot of issues around being able to generate generate healthier boundaries for a given individual, especially once you are attempting to leave that high control space.
Yeah, for sure. So from there, Fish, I'm actually going to ask you about voice for people, the process of developing your voice when it comes to establishing boundaries, things you might have noted about it, things you might have found helpful for people who are like, oh, I don't feel like I'm struggling to express myself, and what are some helpful ways that they can develop those skill sets or start establishing boundaries with their voice?
Okay, yeah, that's actually really great. So very enthusiastic here. Give me a second. Okay, so one of the things that I would love to be a lot more known with voice, with owning a voice and making it your own and setting boundaries, one of the questions you should ask yourself is, what aspects of my singing and my speaking are me for me? And those are things that you don't bring out when other people request it of you. They're you for you, and you do it only when you specifically want to. A lot of people who come into my studio who have performance trauma, this is the big marker, is that they were never allowed to say, I don't want to perform right now. They were never allowed to say, I don't feel like I can do this. Right. So the choice, the ability to say no was taken away from them. You can't consent in that situation.
Oh yeah, as a pastor's daughter, I was forced to perform a lot because my parents were like, the exposure. It's a form of exposure therapy to make me more comfortable with performing.
Exactly. Yeah. So if you don't have something that is you for you, it's almost impossible to have a performance-based life that isn't traumatic. If you're going out there on stage on a regular basis and you don't have something that you draw the line at, I'm not doing that song tonight, or like, hey, my low range, I just like singing that in the shower, you know? Whatever your boundary is, if you don't have something that you can set like that, then you can lose yourself very quickly. Especially, and I really want to go into this because it's very important. Western society feels a sense of entitlement to any performer of any variety. Actually, I'm going to say any artist. You know, somebody who said, like, somebody's very good with drawing, right? The first thing you hear is like, can you draw the cover for my book that I'm writing? Can you draw a poster for this event that's going on? You can use that for service. You can sell that. It's always talking, other people telling you how you can use your creations. And that's extremely toxic. It takes away your ability to make it your expression and to make it the outlet of self that you need to have. Oh, yeah. Because so often we use our art to hold on to ourselves. And in those moments where you deny your boundaries, deny you're holding on to yourself.
Yeah. And I definitely see that, like, Chris makes some phenomenal content, and I can see, like, even going through like any of our content, you get in the comment section, people being like, I want you to tell me about this. Do this with your content, things like that, or just like tone policing your content and whatnot. So I feel that.
It actually made me think of this situation. Somebody had commented something this past like a week or two ago, and it was a comment. It's something that is within my range of talking about. But to speak to Fish, your comments about voice and losing your voice, I keep recording the video in response to this, and I keep tripping over my words. Like I usually have to record a couple times anyways, but like I cannot get out the words. And it was a realization for just myself last night going, I'm not going to talk about this. I'm not going to talk about this topic. It's outside the realm of what I think is what I should be talking about based on my own, comfort levels. And this conversation brought that up of going, that makes a lot more sense. Like it's given context to the kinds of boundaries we have to have, because there is such an entitlement, because capitalism itself is bringing in have a side hustle, turn everything into a side hustle, turn everything into a,
yes. Okay. Yeah, for sure. So, having that little something, having that identify. So first of all, identify what is yours. What is the thing that you do that is yours, and nobody can evoke that from you. Right. Okay. So from there, Fish, what else did you say would be helpful for like establishing your voice and setting boundaries?
Your body knows better than anybody else what sound is good for you. People will come up and try to tell you things. They'll walk up and be like, you must be an alto. You sound like an alto. They're wrong. Unless I'm going to leave that rant over here, actually. We don't need that one right now. So the thing that I would say is listen to your body. Listen to the moments where something just feels open and free. When you have that moment that just feels like standing in the sunlight in a summer day and soaking it in, that wonderful experience, that's your body telling you, yes, I resonate with this. This is easy for me to do. It's healthy for me. That's the stuff that you want to lean into. And please try not to judge yourself off of what your natural sound is. We have this ideal, which there's a lot to unpack behind it, but we have this ideal of like a beautiful voice being very clear and airy and light and angelic, or having raw power and it's passionate. And your voice can be so many things in between. And to try to make it be one or the other when your voice isn't set for that, when your body doesn't want to be that, is the fastest way to just completely, like, you'll actually develop lymph nodes trying to force your body to make sounds that it's not ready or doesn't want to do, right? So pushing yourself into sounds that you think you should have versus sounds that you rejoice in making is a very, very quick way to lose your voice.
Gotcha. Fantastic. Thank you for that. Those are some really great foundational tips. And before we wrap up completely, Chris, I'd also ask on your end, from your experience, what have you found to be helpful for setting boundaries with people that are not being cut out completely? Like they still have to be in your life within these structures for whatever reason. But things that you found really help establish boundaries and keep you safe.
I think there's a lot of really good content. Sometimes it's put under like dealing with narcissistic abuse or surviving narcissistic abuse. The suggestions of things like the gray rocking techniques, things like that, where you're trying to minimize where this person can hurt you.
Right.
And sometimes that you have to just know what topics are safe topics. So, you know, if you can't talk to this person about certain things, or religion has now become taboo, off topic, you know, you can set those boundaries. And I always start with small things. You know, I always say, start small, make boundaries with people who it doesn't matter with necessarily. Tell the barista the wrong order and then correct yourself. You know, start with little things that you can do. And because if you're going to have a panic attack, well, okay, you know, that you can start with the little things, however little that is.
Right.
However little it is. I don't care if you have to go sit outside the Starbucks and think about doing it. You know, like these kinds,
start little itty bitty.
You know, little itty bitty wins, because that's really what this is about. It's about giving yourself the space to have those little wins, that room, that growing edge. Because that's how you start making the big differences. It's those tiny, microscopic, sometimes I don't even know I can be proud of myself about this thing, moments that actually allow you to heal and progress over time.
I love that. I absolutely love that. You both have brought so much great information and perspectives. This was just a fantastic dialogue. I'm so happy y'all came in for this. Like my brain is just buzzing, just like the whole thing happening for this whole conversation. I'm looking at the time. We've got a whole chunk of content here for people to go over and chew over. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to wrap this up for a conclusion, so I don't also tire us. Hope I have it here for forever. But thank you both so much. This is so appreciated. Fish, where can people find your content if they want to learn more about what you provide, what you put out there?
Right now, if you want to have individual lessons, you can email me. It's l@fabledpractice.com. I'll put it up somewhere. In the meantime, if you're looking for me on TikTok, it's @fiercepufferfish. If there's any like underscores or anything, that's not me. Just the words all together, no spaces, Fierce Pufferfish. That's really the only public account that I have right now. So should be pretty easy though.
Fantastic. Yeah, a lot of people who found my content actually specifically found my content through your audios, which is yes, the audios of yours that I use, those are often the favorite bits of mine. So I kind of find that really funny. It's just like this shared collab thing that it makes my brain happy. It's your voice. People really resonate with your voice. So 1000% y'all should check out Fierce Pufferfish on TikTok as well for that Chris Wilson. And anything else you'd like to share for contact for you, Chris?
No, you can find, as I said, you can find my thesis on academia.edu, and I'll give you the link for that. And then I have just a memes that I throw up on Instagram as Church of the Eternal Archetype.
Oh, yes. I love that. All right. Thank you both so much. Of course, you can find my content across the board. You got Twitch, YouTube, whatever else. That all is linked as well. Thank you all so much for listening and for joining. If you have other questions, comments, things like that, feel free to comment, message them as well. Thank you. You are all so appreciated, and we'll see you next time on DIY Sugar Baby Podcast.